Just We the People News, one more time at it. Not attorney, not giving legal advice, okay? Anything I do, say, or do is not legal advice, just my opinion. Alrighty. Never look straight forward, always look around you, be able to protect yourself by any means necessary. Use the Second Amendment, arm yourself with knowledge, okay? And let's decide to proceed forward on this. And I'm going to try to make this short and sweet. This is education only, okay? Do your own research.
And Mike points out that many of the colonial grievances were economic. Of course, we've heard the phrase taxation without representation, but that was just an example of so many of the other things that were going on. He said this stemmed from the fundamental economic system embraced by the empire, mercantilism, a system that used state power in an attempt to accumulate wealth for the nation and its favorite businesses. Now, a lot of people, again, they look to the Stamp Act as the beginning of arbitrary power, and I've done that many times over the years as well, but I've learned also over the years as well that people like Jefferson and others recognize that there was a problem much earlier. Madison at one point had written, James Madison had written at one point, like, look, okay, we always thought all of this stuff was unconstitutional. We let it go because it didn't seem so bad. But it was unconstitutional from day one. And so Jefferson went all the way back to the mid-17th century, where he attacked British laws and regulations on trade, both internal and external. And he really went after this mercantilist notion that the British could have protectionist policies by talking about the right of free trade, natural right of free trade. He said the exercise of a free trade with all parts of the world possessed by the American colonists as of natural right, and of which no law of their own had taken away or abridged, was the next object of unjust encroachment. In other words, this is another one of these things that we make the decision on ourselves. You have no say over this whatsoever. If we want to restrict our own trade and be dumb, that might be up to us, but, well, anyways, he even referenced a treaty that Virginia made, I think in 1651, to guarantee free trade. He said, by solemn treaty, entered into on the 12th day of March, there it is, 1651, between the said Commonwealth by their commissioners and the colony of Virginia by their House of Burgesses, it was expressly stipulated by the 8th article of the said treaty that they should have, quote, free trade as the people of England do enjoy to all places and with all nations according to the laws of that Commonwealth. So saying like, look, this is what our expectations are. We've even signed a deal with you to make it so, and you violated this all along. He went back to 1651. Harry points out that Jefferson then, in his list of grievances, he cited specific acts in the years. He said Jefferson referenced several acts, including the Destruction of Trees Act of 1663, that regulated, really prohibited in many situations, the cutting down of trees. How difficult would that be for a lot of people? The act was intended, of course, it's a protectionist policy to protect British shipbuilding resources. So if the Americans could supply a lot more lumber, then at a cheaper cost, then that might impact some businesses that were already favored back home in the mother country. He also implicated the Trade Act of 1672 and the Navigation Act of 1673, which were part of a broader bundle of laws generally referred to as the Navigation Acts, imposed, Mike writes, between 1651 and 1696. So Jefferson's going through this. It's not like he was just new to understanding the history of the American colonies, and he's going through this in detail, this list of acts. These laws restricted colonial trade by generally requiring that goods imported to or exported from the colonies must be transported on British ships. We have a similar act like that today, called the Jones Act. Now, I covered many more of these mercantilist acts going all the way back to 1651 in much more detail in an episode, Mercantilism Before the Tea Party, Forgotten Grievance of the Revolution. That's going to be linked to in the show notes over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. It's all spelled out. Alan Mosley will get the blog post organized for this episode, where we include not only all the different platforms we're on, both video and audio-only podcast editions, But there's also, if you scroll down a little bit for each blog post, there's a show links section. So I'm going through this pretty quickly. I'm just giving you highlights to kind of whet your appetite in case you want to read and learn more in context on your own time. And you will be able to find that all kind of in order as I go through it in the show. And you can follow along. Again, 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. I'll get that published a couple of hours after the live stream is done. Anyways, back to Jefferson. He continued with this. The trade of the colonies. So I'm going to give some highlights of some of these mercantilist acts that he's talking about. He said the trade of the colonies was laid under such restrictions as show what hopes they might form from the justice of a British Parliament were its uncontrolled power admitted over these states. So he's looking to the history. What have they done? And let's look at that as an example of how will they use this precedent against us. And, in other words, he said the acts of Parliament were not just encroachments. He considered them prophetic. They were a taste of how things were going to end up if the British were allowed to build on the precedents they had already established, especially with external trade, but what they were already doing internally as well. He expected total and complete control. And he continued with this. History has informed us that bodies of men, as well as individuals, are susceptible of the spirit of tyranny. And that should be super obvious, but...
All right. I paused it for you guys just to think of the words they just said. And how does that apply today? So think about it.
He said, a view of these acts of Parliament for regulation, as it has been effectively called, of the American trade, if all other evidence were removed out of the case, would undeniably evince the truth of this observation. So, look.
Right? And where do we go back? Regulations, 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 regulations. Okay? Statute codes, rules, and regulations. Rules, rules, rules.
They call it regulation. They're going to make it regular. We're just going to regulate these bad guys. We're going to make everything equal for everybody. These are the types of phrases we hear today. They've been using terms like this for centuries. And Jefferson called him out on this. He's like, okay, you want to call it that? But really what it is showing us that these people are susceptible of the spirit of tyranny. Anyways, he then went on to give a number of specific examples. I covered some of those in that Mercantilist article in more detail than I will here. But one of them was the Iron Act of 1750. Not something I ever was taught in government-run school. Probably not anybody here, but once in a while you find somebody. But that act prohibited the production of iron in the colonies. Again, it was protecting domestic, for the British, domestic businesses. And so they were trying to keep the people down over here so they could make more money over there. And Jefferson was no...
What's going on today? Huh? What's going on today? The billionaires are way up there. And we are way down here. Keeping it separated.
And of that, of course. He said, the iron which we make, we are forbidden to manufacture. And heavy as that article is, and necessary in every branch of husbandry, besides commission and insurance, we are to pay freight for it to Great Britain and freight for it back again for the purpose of supporting not men but machines in the island of Great Britain. The absurdity of this, like we're not allowed, we can produce raw materials here, but we can't actually manufacture stuff with iron. Or into iron, I guess. I'm not really sure about the manufacturing end of things, but he's basically saying in order for us to use this, we first have to ship it all the way there, let them do it, they earn the money, they get the jobs, it comes back here, we got to pay way more for it, and then we can finally use it. This is...
Again, what are we doing? Taking our business to like China, and all of a sudden... You can buy cheaper things here, but people here are without jobs.
Absurd. Here's another one that no one talks about. Well, it's beyond absurd. It really is an act of tyranny. Another one no one talks about is the Hat Act of 1732. It sounds kind of innocuous, a Hat Act, But he points out that by an act passed in the 5th year of the reign of His late Majesty King George II, an American subject is forbidden to make a hat for himself of the fur which he has taken perhaps on his own soil. There was a restriction on production of hats and some other articles of clothing, and even if you took the animal on your own property, you were not allowed to make it into something else. It had to be from a British business, and you couldn't do this locally.
What? Wait a minute. So, I need some food and a deer walks on my property instead of banking on state government of food stamps and all that. A deer walks on my property. I can feed my family, but I'm prohibited to doing that. That's not what the Constitution says in the state of Texas. It says I can do it, but what do they do? Created a bypass, regulate a statute, a code and rules and regulation that's in contradictory to the state constitution and many other states, by the way, due to under the guides to keep everything regulated. All right? But that being said, a deer would feed my family a whole month, but I can't shoot the deer on my own property. People, sit and think about that. Are we or are we not turned into England?
He said, an instance of despotism to which no parallel can be produced in the most arbitrary ages of British history. Today, if someone did that, a lot of people would probably be opposed to it. But certainly you'd get responses like, okay, yeah, I mean, this isn't going to end my life. This isn't going to be the worst thing on earth. But Jefferson understood the precedent. If they can control what you can make on your own property from the fruits of your own labor in your own home, they have unlimited power. He considered it an instance of despotism to which no parallel can be produced. Man, the Hat Act.
Right, okay. Let's just say I grew alfalfa for cows. It's my grass on my property. And now the government comes in and says, hey, you can't do that without a special card. Right? Exact same thing. All right? It violates our right to contract. Okay? If I make, let's just say, if I make cups out of my little garage and sell it to the people that want to buy it, now they want me to get a business license. Then they want me to pay tax on there, which is exactly what they're talking about. They're doing to us today.
Of 1732. We got to talk about that one a little bit more. Then he used the same principles that he would later cite in the Kentucky Resolutions of 1798 against the Hated Alien and Sedition Acts, where he said a nullification of the act is the rightful remedy when they go beyond the limits of the Constitution. So he pronounced all these British acts, these acts of regulation and commercial trade from 1651 to the Iron Act of 1750. We'll get to more after that as well. He pronounced them all a nullity and void. And he put it like this: we do not point out to His Majesty the injustice of these acts with the intent to rest on that principle the cause of their nullity, but to show that experience confirms the propriety of those political principles which exempt us from the jurisdiction of the British Parliament. The true ground on which we declare these acts void is that the British Parliament has no right to exercise authority over us. Man, there's so much to unpack there, but the TLDR, the British...
And there is, right? Even our government was designed to stay out of our way, our prosperity, our unlimited right to contract, with one another, people to people, man to man, not to businesses, corporations, not to overseas. Some of it could be overseas. Okay? But this is where we have an unlimited right to contract. Hell versus Hinkle, y'all. Okay? I don't need a permit. Forcing me to have a permit is unconstitutional. And don't think government don't know about this. It took a period of time to re-establish this and put it in a different name to do the exact same thing as the King of England, what they called Brits at that time, is doing today.
Of no power whatsoever. The Parliament has no power over the colonies. Their trade, their laws, internal, external, nothing. Far more radical than what most people would think went down in the American Revolution, where they were just concerned about internal taxes, or they wanted representatives in order to have taxes. He's saying Parliament has no authority whatsoever. And then on top of it, we are declaring it void. Now, of course, they're asking for them to get rid of them, but we are declaring them void. Of course, we know that smuggling and other things were making them void in practice and effect. Well,
all right, we're going to stop there. I mean, history is, in fact, repeating itself. And not only now that we don't have a king, but we are bound under the judicial branch that made themselves kings. Even presidents can't override judges. Congress cannot override judges. And they can. The downfall is they're not even doing it because Congress can actually impeach federal judges. Your legislature can impeach in every single state judges. The problem is you're not telling them to do it. Just like Jefferson, right? He's telling them like it is. You can't do this. And we're not petitioning our legislatures, Congress, or state that, hey, judges cannot do this. This will be the People News. Bye, y'all.